Hi, everyone. This is Terry Brooks, and I have just enjoyed a good 45 minutes on the Great Big Beautiful podcast.
Have you ever been to Disneyland?
Affirmative.
That was definitely an e-ticket.
I can't believe all the new gadgets they've got now. For a while, we didn't even have a house phone, not to mention laser discs, high-def TV.
You are listening to the Great Big Beautiful Podcast. This week on the show.
When I'm not writing for money, I'm writing because I like to write. Yeah. I just like to write. So the output's pretty congenial, actually. It's like, it's like you write a book a year and basically spend the rest of the time, shooting aliens and, and video games. So that wasn't my concern.
Here are your hosts, Jamie Green and Justin Connors.
This is the Great Big Beautiful Podcast, Facebook.com/the GBB Podcast, Twitter @the GBB Podcast, and anywhere you get your podcasts. There's a lot of saying podcast a lot in a row.
It's a lot of podcasting right there.
Podcast. We should just take it out of the name. We're just the Great Big Beautiful. Like as a collective, we're the beautiful.
Like fill in the blank.
Yeah, exactly.
We are. Yeah, I like that.
They can guess what it means, and we won't even tell them. You don't even need to know.
It could be, it could have a different meaning for every person, depending on how you like to finish that thought.
All right. So before we came on, you were messaging me, and we have depending on how much you like to listen to our podcast, we have something cool coming up in May. We're going to be going to 2 a week again. Is that what we were talking about? Did we confirm it?
We are. You just did, I think.
I just did. There we go. Official announcement.
We've gotten ourselves into a little bit of a backlog again, which is not a bad problem to have. And I mentioned this before when we were going 2 a week for a while. I don't like to have, when people come on, especially if they have something to promote, and we talk about that, I don't want it to be like 4 months later we release the episode, and then it's like not a very timely discussion anymore. And so, yeah, I think right now it's just for the month of May. We'll see how many more get lined up and recorded between now and then. But I think for the month of May, we'll be going back to 2 a week just to sort of clear out the queue for now.
I like to think that there's somebody listening right now that like fist pumped. They're like, yes, yes, yes. And then they went and tweeted about it and told 2 a week guys in May. Check it out. So we had a guest host this week, Jamie.
We did. Shiri Sondheimer is back on the show. We talked to John Scalzi this week, and she's a super fan, as am I, and she jumped at the chance to be able to sit in on the conversation and chat with him. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here at this moment. She's off doing something else that's equally fun. I'm not going to sort of spoil her surprise, but if you read Geek Mom or Geek Dad this week, you should be able to figure out where she was if you look for her byline. But yeah, so we sat down, we talked to John Scalzi. Last month, he had a new book out called The Collapsing Empire, which we talk about it a little bit, but it had this roaring out of the gate success. If you're unfamiliar with Scalzi, if you don't read science fiction that much, like new science fiction, he sort of burst onto the scene in 2005-ish with Old Man's War, which eventually grew into a 6-book series, and I think he wrote I don't know how many, several short stories that went along with the same series, same universe. 3 of those 6, I think, were nominated for the Hugo. So they're, nothing to poo-poo. And then he wrote Redshirts, which most people, if you've only read one of Scalzi's books or are familiar with only 1 or 2 of his books, you probably are aware of Redshirts. Redshirts sort of takes the Star Trek conceit of, the Redshirts who always die, that the whole gag of Star Trek. And it's sort of, it puts a really, really interesting twist on it. And I'm not gonna, if you don't know what the twist is, I'm not going to ruin it for you. It's not like an end of the book twist. It comes in, I think, the first half, you figure out what that twist is, but just the way that he tells that story and brings something new to that idea is really, really fascinating. And that book actually won the Hugo. So the Collapsing Empire came out last month. It's first book in what's going to be it's going to be a series. It's a new universe. It's phenomenal. I would really, really recommend it if you like his work. If you like speculative fiction, definitely give it a shot. It's an amazing book. Another thing that I should probably note is that a couple of years ago, his publisher, which is Tora Books, he sort of caused some ripples with this unprecedented book deal he got with them. Most writers, I don't know the industry that well, but most writers, if they get a book deal, it's going to be for a couple books or for a trilogy or for a series of books or something like that. He got a 13-book, 10-year deal with Tor, which was unprecedented. Yeah, exactly.
It sounds
right?
like a Major League Baseball
that's
contract.
It almost was, and it's job security if ever there was one. But that's, you think about it, that's 13 books over 10 years. That's a lot of writing he's got to live up to. But that's just how much faith Tor has in him and his ability to sell books and tell compelling stories. So we have a great conversation. We talk about the new book. We talk about some of the old books. We talk about, whether that book deal sort of brought any pressure to his writing approach, whether it put how much of an added weight it put on him. We talk about the Joko cruise. He was on the cruise, as was I believe I've mentioned that. We talk about some of the stuff he did there and how important it is for writers, even professional writers, to sort of have an outlet amongst one another where they can, share the struggles that they have or the hardships that they face, in writing and being able to be creative on a daily basis.
Awesome. So that's I can't wait to listen to it. I'm going to go listen to it now. All right, guys. I say that like I don't like our podcast enough to listen to it. Well, I'm going to go listen to this one. All right, we're going to go play this episode for you, that interview right now. Hope you enjoy.
John, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. It's awesome to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
First of all, I have to give you a big congratulations on the amazing out-of-the-gate success that you've had with The Collapsing Empire. I understand that it has broken all sorts of records for you in terms of sales. Is that right?
That's correct. It is the first week sales are the largest of any book that I've had. It's done very well in hardcover and ebook and audio. It's actually the number 2 audio book on audible.com this week, and that's for all books, not just science fiction books. On BookScan, it's apparently the number 1 hardcover science fiction book and the number 17 hardcover book in the country at the moment. And it was number 25 on the USA Today bestseller list. We didn't get on the New York Times bestseller list because who knows why, but everything else has
still,
actually checked out.
That's
so we
pretty
can't
amazing.
complain.
No, that's pretty awesome.
I have 2 kids and 2 jobs, and I read it in 2 days. So,
well, good. That was the point. One of the things that we really want to do with the books in general, but specifically with Collapsing Empire, because it was the first book in this really long contract I have with Tor, is we wanted something that people could get in right away, and that they really just wanted to flip the pages to find out what happens next. So the fact that sounds like it worked the way it wanted to makes me very happy. Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny. I was many of your books are very fast reads, which is great because I'm not a fast reader in general, but I find that I can sit down like 2-3 sittings and just kind of clear through one of the books, and every time I finish one, it makes me want to just go find more. And when I was doing a little bit of reading, I saw a quote from Tor, and it was actually about the agreement that you have, and they were saying, well, this makes a whole lot of sense because one of the things that we found with readers is that new readers to John Scalzi read one of his books and then want to just devour everything else that he's written, so that your backlist has a really strong showing. And I wonder why that is. And I'm sure you've thought about that, but that's not. It made so much sense when I read that, because I said, yeah, it's exactly how I approached it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that genre in general, and it doesn't matter if it's science fiction or romance or whatever genre, there's kind of a bar for entry where people go, oh, I don't read science fiction, or I don't read fantasy, or I don't read romance, or I don't read Western. So you have to overcome that initial reluctance no matter what. But once you do that, and people have what's an enjoyable experience for a book, then they learn to trust the author. They're like, well, I want to go find this. This has worked for me.
Yeah.
Let me go do this again. One of the things I do, and I've talked about this before, is that when I'm writing a book, I think about my mother-in-law, Dora. And she is basically middle America to the core. She doesn't usually read science fiction, but she's going to read my stuff because I'm her son-in-law and she loves me. So what I do is, while I'm writing all these things that I'm writing about, I keep Dora in my mind. She's not my ideal reader, but she is the person that I use as the test of, can I write this so that she understands it, has a good time with it, and can continue on with the story, while at the same time doing everything else that I want to do with the science and with the plot and so on and so forth. And if I can accomplish both, if I can keep Dora in mind while still keeping to what I want to say in the story, then basically means it's open to anyone, so that the books are accessible. And I think people like that. I think people like books that they read and they get, that they can get them, and that they don't feel like they're being talked down to, or that they're missing out on the joke. And I think that's why once people read the things, they want to go read the other ones, because they feel confident that they're going to be able to follow it no matter what happens.
Yeah. I saw that the TV rights for the new book have already been snatched up. Was that the fastest that rights have been picked up for one of your books?
Well, for books that are actually in the process of being published, yes. I actually have an option for a book that I haven't written yet, but it's already being developed for TV, and I can't talk anything about it other than the fact that it sort of exists. But that was kind of amusing to me. They're like, what are you working on? And I said, well, I have this idea for a story. They're like, that's a great idea. We're going to take it. Yeah. And I'm like, woohoo.
Well, that shows a lot of faith in you, right?
Yeah, yeah. But certainly my agent, Joel Gottler, along with Ethan Ellenberg, who's my literary agent, we shopped it around. People were asking about it before it came out. Once the book announcement was made that there was a new book coming out, people started saying, hey, can we take a look at it? So we sent the final manuscript when it was done, and we started getting inquiries about it. And eventually we talked with the folks at Working Title, and we're super impressed with them, and super impressed with everything that they asked about the book. I mean, they really sort of got it. And so we felt like that was the place to place our baby.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you are you one to sort of play the casting game in your head, or do you just not get that invested until it's really a reality?
Right, and I think you've made a point there. Getting invested before it's really a reality. The thing about TV and film options is, once they've been optioned, you have the announcement. You're like, all right, it's going to be a TV series, or all right, it's going to be a film. And the answer is no, it's probably not.
Yeah.
For every 100 things that get optioned, maybe one even makes it through its option period to have a screenwriter attached or a producer attached. And then it actually has to go through the long process of, the screenplay being approved by everybody, and then getting to a point where a studio will look at it, or someone like Netflix will look at it, and then maybe a pilot, and then getting approved. And there's just so many places that it can fall down.
Yeah.
And so the very first time I ever got anything optioned, I was like, this is awesome. It's going to happen. It's going to be super cool. And these days I'm like, cool, it's been optioned. Free money.
Yeah.
And then other than that, just sort of kind of holding off on the excitement.
Yeah.
I don't suggest that I'm not happy when things do get optioned, but it does become the reality of, well, we will see what happens from here. So
It's
in
a
that
long
particular
road.
case, it's a long road. So in that case, I tend to hold off on casting, in my brain until we're further along that it actually becomes something we have to think about.
Exactly.
When stuff does get optioned and you are thinking about it, in your head, would you prefer a direct translation or more of an adaptation?
Well, I think no matter what, and this is me talking as someone who has a history as a film critic and has been following the business in a professional sense literally since the early 90s. I think if you option a work of yours without the understanding that it is absolutely going to be adapted and changed, then you are kind of deluding yourself. A novel is not a TV series. A novel is not a movie. There's going to have to be expansion, compression, things that you might have put in that you didn't have time for might get back in, or they may just add stuff and make it an addition to what you've already done. And you have to understand that that's going to happen, and you have to be open to the fact that where you were previously completely in control of your universe, now you are a collaborator, and you're not even the primary collaborator anymore, right? Because the directors and the producers and the screenwriter that they'll get, if they don't have you do it, which they probably won't because you haven't written a screenplay before, you put that all together, and it becomes something that's very different. Now, what you hope for and what you do prior to saying yes is you try to divine as much as possible whether the people who want to option the thing are actually interested in the property itself and want to develop it in a way that resembles what you've already done, or if they want to go in a completely different direction and they just want the title or something like that. And in either case, it could be fine, but you have to be aware. Like I said, in the case of Working Title, who we were talking with the Collapsing Empire, the producers I spoke to really asked cogent questions about the book, and everybody was on the same page of, if this gets made into a TV series, we'll have 10 to 13 episodes or whatever. There are things that we will have to deal with when we get there, but everybody was happy with the shape of things as they currently were. So in that case, I feel super confident that whatever comes out of that, if something comes out of it, the people who love the book will definitely recognize the TV series as well.
That's great. I know I could probably find this answer by listening to the audiobook of Collapsing Empire, but I was wondering if you could help me. Your preferred pronunciation for No Hamapatan. I think I stumbled over it every single time in the book.
Well, that is actually a name that I made up. It doesn't have a particular real world antecedent. I was thinking basically a family that was a combination of possibly Japanese and Malaysian at way back when. So I usually say Nahama Payton.
Oh, okay.
But one of the things that they did when they were doing the audiobook is they sent me a document that was like 4 or 5 pages long, which had every single name and every single planet name and so on and so forth. I'm like, how do you pronounce this? Tell us, because we want to get it right. Because now that it's out in an audiobook, sort of the audiobook is canonical in terms of what is the pronunciation.
Right.
So I gave them as much information as I can. I actually haven't listened to the audiobook yet, simply because I've been on tour and been doing other stuff. But I've listened to a couple snippets here and there, and of course, obviously, I've heard Will do my stuff before. So I think that whatever pronunciation he came out with, I think it'll probably be fine. I'm sure that there are a couple that are rooted in the real world that people who are natives to the language from which they're derived will say, that's not the right pronunciation, to which the response would possibly be, well, yeah, but it takes place 1,500 years in the future, and the Earth is not part of the conversation anymore.
Yeah.
There's been a vowel shift.
Well, speaking of the audiobook, and you mentioned you had Will Wheaton narrating, something interesting that I've heard you say is that you like to have Will read your books because the natural cadence of his speaking voice is perfectly in sync with the way that you think. So it's almost like you hear his voice while you're writing. Is that true?
Well, no, I don't think that that's absolutely accurate. And I think that Will is perfectly happy with the idea that he's not like sitting in my head narrating every single thing that I do. But what is true is that Will and I are very similar in terms of the way that we use language. We grew up in the same area. We grew up in Southern California. We grew up, we're about the same age. He's a couple of years younger than I am. And his intonations and the way that he speaks and the way that language comes out of his mouth and head are very similar to mine. I was actually reading on the Joko cruise. I was doing a reading, and as I was reading it, I was struck by just how much of the beats sounded similar to how I expected Will to actually do them when he did them. So basically what I'd say to people is not that he lives in my head, but he sounds like I would sound if I narrated the books, except better because he's a professional actor.
Right.
That is his job. His job is performing words, and my job is writing words. So as far as it goes, when he reads it, it is very close to how I would read it, except better.
Yeah. I had to smile when I was reading because you mentioned this, that there are real world antecedents for some of the names and the pronunciations and the places. But when you mentioned, and it was just in passing, but when you mentioned Cardinia's grandmother, Emperor Zetian, which would have made her her surname would have made her Wu Zetian. And if you're familiar at all with Chinese history, that's a very famous figure. And so, I caught it, but I'm wondering, how many other these little quote unquote, like Easter eggs do you scatter throughout your book that are just there for people? If they catch them, great. If they don't, it's okay.
Yeah, no, there are definitely Easter eggs there. That was one of them. So well done, you. And one of the things that I wanted to do in a sort of subtle way with the interdependency is make the point that this is what we would currently describe as a very diverse multicultural universe. The people in power are not necessarily the people that we see in power, in our day-to-day lives, and that it is 1,500 years in the future, and so a lot of this stuff is just part of a shared culture rather than, they come from over here or they come from over there or whatever. So that diversity I wanted to reflect in place names and the names of people and the names of ancestors and so on and so forth. So hopefully, and like I said, the way to make sure that everybody hates you is to hit them over the head with that sort of stuff. But if you put it in there and you don't make a big deal about it, then you can do a lot. It's sort of like how in Lock-In, I had a character, the main character, the protagonist, the gender was never specified, and it took a while for people to realize that Chris was biracial as well, simply because that was information in the story, but I didn't put myself up on a soapbox and make a big deal out of it. Yeah. Nevertheless, it was there. Nevertheless, it was essential part of the story. So you kind of, if you're working at it, hopefully, you can thread that needle and make the world that you build the worlds that you would want to see.
Yeah. Science fiction in general seems to be a really good place, or maybe it's just that the authors who are making this push seem to be writing science fiction, but it seems that the discussions of diversity in fiction that we're having are mostly stemming out of science fiction or genre books. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, why is science fiction such a good genre to make that push, to make that diversity normal? And we're not going to make a big deal about it. That's just how it is.
Well, I think we need to be clear. Science fiction, especially over the last few years, had a big blow up about diversity and inclusion and putting into the literature the worlds that people want to see. I wouldn't necessarily say that we as a genre or we as writers are getting it 100% correct all the time. So as much as I would like to pat myself and others on the back for this, there's still work to be done. But the fact is that science fiction deals with the future. It deals with speculation. It is a perfect place to say in the future, these things are important, but these things aren't important, or these arguments have been settled, and these arguments aren't even a question anymore.
Right.
So if you want to do that, it has the ability to accommodate it. Now, at the same time, if you wanted to just do science fiction that was only white, only straight, only male, and some people do, you could do that too, and that's fine. It has space for that as well. But I think the fact that right now we have so many writers who are not coming from where the typical golden age science fiction authors were coming from. I mean, you think of the people who wrote fantastic writers, but they were all, a lot of them were white and they were straight and they were male and they were engineers or scientists.
Right.
And all of that was fine. But it was a very specific point of view with a very specific tone and a very specific intent. The fact that we have people like Nora Jemisin or Alyssa Wong or Charlie Jane and just who are coming in from completely different angles, doing completely different things with the genre is something that strengthens us rather than distracts from what science fiction should be. Science fiction should be whatever it is the people who write it want it to be. And I'm super excited about being, someone who is writing today, because I look at people like Nora or Charlie Jane Anders, and I see them as colleagues and people who are pushing me as a writer to be better and to imagine better universes than I might if everybody else who was writing in the genre looked at and acted and thought like I did.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because I interviewed Mike Cole last week and he said exactly the same thing and cited all of the same authors. So
right.
It's
well, the thing is Nora is coming off of a very nice role, particularly with she just won the Hugo. Charlie Jane, she's was nominated for a Nebula this year, if memory serves, and Alyssa just also recently won herself a Nebula. So they are hot authors right now, and they're also ones that pop to mind. But the thing is that they are the franchise players on a team whose bench is getting deeper and deeper and deeper. I could mention Bo Bolander. I could mention Lynn and Michael Thomas. I could mention a whole bunch of people if my brain wasn't fried from touring at the moment. But the simple fact of the matter is, where you previously could have only mentioned a couple of people who are not the typical white straight folks who were in the club of current A-list folks or in the pantheon, so to speak. What we're going to see is when people are writing the history of science fiction from 2000 to 2025, I suspect that it's going to look a lot different. It is going to look a lot more diverse. The fact that right now, probably the hottest person or the most significant person in science fiction is Ted Chiang, because Arrival has really opened up the mainstream to his work, is one, tremendously exciting from a reading point of view, because all of his stuff is so good. I remember I came in second place to him in a Locust short story poll, and I was like, woohoo, I won. Because it was going up against Ted Chiang. But it also signals the point that where we are today is not necessarily where we were, and hopefully that we continue so that everybody who wants to be part of the conversation of what science fiction and fantasy is gets to be. Now, and this is the point where I also point out that I am not the perfect messenger for any of this, since so much of what I write and what I do is old school, and that I am, a perfect example of what everybody has expected science fiction to look like for years and years. Nevertheless, speaking as someone who's writing, who's looking at colleagues, and as someone who's reading, I am super excited and super happy to be writing and reading in the genre today, because I think it's as good as it's ever been, and I think it's only going to get better from here.
And then switching from writers to your characters a little bit, from Collapsing Empire, tell us a little bit about Kiva and Lagos and where they came from, because they're fantastic.
Oh, well, I really love Kiva. And importantly, when I was writing her, my wife, who is my first reader, and who, frankly, will let me know when I'm not doing things correctly, because she strongly believes that she loves me too much to let me screw up. She was just very much of, yes, Kiva, she is awesome. Keep writing her the way that you're writing her. And the thing about Kiva is, I think it just comes out of partly knowing, in my own life experience, a lot of women who are like her, who are, very much of, what, I'm done with your crap. I have things to do. I'm going to do them, and you are going to come along with me. That's great. If you're not, then I'm going to run you over, and that's going to be fine too, because I got things to do. My wife is one of those people. I'm not saying that Kiva is inspired directly by her, but she has that same sort of attitude in a little bit of a way. And this is the first time I've actually mentioned it, but it's worth saying. Very tiny bit modeled over the way that I feel Nora Jemisin handles the entire flood of hate that's been brought to her. Like, Nora's a real person and has to deal with real crap and everything else like that. But one of the things that I've admired about her for years and years is that she's planted her flag, in the ground and said, "This is where I am, and you are going to have to accept that I'm here and that I'm not going to move for you." And I definitely don't want to make a comparison between the real world effects that Nora has to deal with, because the real world is not as nicely tied up as my world is. But the fact that she has been someone who has planted that flag just absolutely inspired me. So there's a tiny bit of Nora Jemisin's DNA in that character, along with a tiny bit of my wife's DNA and a tiny bit of the DNA of all the women I know who are not here for your crap, And one of the things that I sincerely hope that I was able to get across was that Kiva, although she's an idealized character, I don't think she's a fantasy character. I think that she is someone who can and should exist in the real world. She's not necessarily the nicest person. I don't know that you would necessarily want to be her friend all the time. I made this mention somewhere else that she's the sort of person that if you called her on the phone, or she called you on the phone, you would look at her phone number popping up on your screen and going, "Oh, do I really do I have the time?" Right? And if you didn't answer, she would immediately text you and say, "I know you're there. Pick up the damn phone." But the thing is just that she's unapologetic. She is, knows what she wants, and she wants to go and get it. And if I were writing the character as a male character, or as a dude, no one would think about it twice. The fact that people are still saying, Kiva, she's super awesome. And the fact that I agree, Kiva's super awesome, says that there's still, that little bit of disparity there. So I'm glad that she's there, planting the flag in the future world and saying, I've got things to do, come with me or get rolled over. So
I see her and Christian Avasarala starting an army together.
You are not the first person to mention that. And I think that that's a good point. And I also think, again, it's nice in that particular case that both of those characters are being written by dudes who are just having it as part of the world. Yeah. Again, this is not a cookie-bearing statement. Hey, look, we're writing strong women. But I think if you check with, in both cases, it's like it just made sense to have those characters in there. We weren't like, and now I shall plant a flag for, equality. It was, I need a super cool character. Who's it going to be? It's going to be this one.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, the looking to the future and all the, how exciting it is to be writing right now. And based on the deal that you have with Tor, you're not going anywhere, which is good for us as readers. But I wonder if, at some point when you sign that, it was announced a couple years ago, which for anybody listening who doesn't know, it was for 13 books over 10 years. Creatively, did you ever just sort of freeze and be like, wow, that's a lot of words?
No.
Really?
And I'll tell you why. Yeah, no, because in the past 10 years, since Old Man's War came out, I have written like 17 books.
Yeah.
You're not counting the books that are novellas or, or shorter than that have come through Subterranean Press. So I write a lot. I wrote when I was a film critic at the Fresno Bee when I first started out. I wrote 8 articles a week, and all of them were on deadline. I have had my blog for, I think this is year 19.
Wow.
And so when I'm not writing for money, I'm writing because I like to write.
Yeah.
I just like to write. So the output's pretty congenial, actually. It's like, it's like you write a book a year and basically spend the rest of the time, shooting aliens and, and video games. So that wasn't my concern. And also when I went in to do this deal, I came in with 13 books worth of synopses, right?
Uh-huh.
I was like, no matter what, I have ideas for these 13 books, so we can get those done.
So you're not staring at a blank page?
No, definitely not. If worst comes to worst, we just go off the 13 books that I listed as here. These are the ones that I want to do.
Yeah.
Now, already we have some flexibility with that. The Collapsing Empire series, because it was always thought to be a series, is contracted for 2 books, and I need to write the second book to find this out for sure, but I have a strong suspicion that it's actually going to be a trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because I've introduced so many plot points and characters and so on and so forth that to do them justice, I think I might need a 3rd book. In which case we'll put that in and swap out something else.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what that 13-book series means to me is that for the next 10 years, until I'm in my mid-50s, that I don't have to worry about whether or not about selling the book. I just have to focus on writing the book and making it as good as I can be. And it's also nice to know that I have a partner in Tor, and also Audible, because I have an Audible deal that basically mirrors the Tor deal, where they are super committed to making sure that every book that I put out gets out to an audience. They have to. They spend a whole lot of money on it. They got to make it back somehow.
So to be that dedicated, obviously you have to love to write, but like you must have a regimen. Like, what's your daily routine in order to make sure that you do stay on track to get that book a year done?
The plan, and the plan should be understood to be in quotes there, is that when I'm writing a book, basically from 8 o'clock in the morning until noon, I disconnect the internet and I write for 4 straight hours or until I get to 2,000 words, whichever comes first, because I'm a fairly fast writer. And that's the plan, and usually it works once I get myself going. The real trouble is starting because I'm very easily distractible, and particularly over the last year, If you go to the internet before you start writing, you will find something that has blown up that will just make your your brain cycle away from writing creatively. So I've really had to put my ass in a chair and turn off the internet and just write. For Collapsing Empire, which I was writing during the election, I literally had to go to, and pull out your tiny violins, I literally had to go to Hawaii to actually write the book, because it's so far away from everything that by the time I woke up in the morning, everything that was going to go wrong in the world had already gone wrong. Yeah, and there was nothing to do about it, so I might as well just go ahead and write. And so I was there for like 8 days, and I ended up writing 25,000 words.
Wow.
Simply because I was in paradise, and it was, the real world was far away. And my wife also said to me, if you actually check the news, I will break your fingers. And she was right to do that. So it's been tough because of world events and stuff like that in the last year or so. But yeah, you absolutely have to have a process. You actually do have to sit down. You do have to write. You do have to unplug the internet, because the world's going to be there when you get back. Or if it blows up while you're writing, well, then you don't have. That's one less deadline you're going to have to worry about.
So even when you have all these books planned out, do you ever still find yourself getting stuck, or is it not as much of an issue?
What I find out these days is not so much getting stuck as I'll start a book and I will write about 25 or 30,000 words, and I'll be like, oh, nope, those weren't the right 30,000 words, and I will chuck them and I will start over. And the first time that happened, I freaked out, because I was like, oh my God, what happened? Now I put myself behind schedule. Actually, that book I finished on time, but now I recognize that is now part of my process, where I spend 20 to 30,000 words going in the wrong direction to figure out where it is that I want to go. So now when that happens, I kind of go, yep, that's to be expected. I chuck it, but I've solved a lot of problems while I'm doing that. Not only in the idea of what not to do, but a lot of the little fiddly details of world building have resolved themselves. So when I start over, things move much more quickly. I mean, it happened with Collapsing Empire. When I started it, I wanted to have a sort of Frank Herbert-esque tone to it, because it's, galaxy-spanning civilization and so on and so forth. And so I started writing not exactly like Frank Herbert, but in sort of that grand style. And it was terrible. It was just awful. And as I was writing it, I'm like, no, this is gone super bad. But like I said, I got a lot of world building out of it, and I also knew how not to write this particular book. And so the final book, I think, was a lot stronger because of it.
That's interesting. You're talking about the challenges that you run up against, and how your process now is just sort of, you write a bunch of words, and if they're wrong, you chuck them and you start over, and that's how you arrive at the right story.
Sure.
So we were both just on the Joko cruise, and one of the highlights of the week for me was the panel that you moderated, the Writing Implosions panel. And so in that panel, you talked about, among a lot of other things, the difficulties that writers sometimes face with just getting the words on the page, and the motivation and the writing and the ideas. But what struck me is that, for me sitting in the audience, and for everybody else, it was an incredibly fascinating and insightful conversation. But what struck me was that it was almost therapeutic for the other writers on the panel. How important do you think conversations like that are among writers, and how rare are they?
Well, I mean, I think it is very important for writers to talk to other writers, because it's a solitary profession. You're sitting in a room and you're typing, and a lot of times you will encounter difficulties, or you will encounter issues, not only with the writing, but your career and how people apprehend you as a writer. And you can get that feeling of, is this just me? Am I alone in this? And so when you go to talk to other writers, one of the things that you learn is probably not only are you not alone, but what you're experiencing is something that nearly all writers have experienced. So it's really important for us to have those conversations, not just for our own sanity, but also because, frankly, it's an opaque business. It's hard to know how much people are making and what you should be doing in your contracts when asking for things. And like, for example, audiobooks have just exploded in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, it's become a truly significant portion of my income where it wasn't literally 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so all of this stuff, you put it together, and if we are not talking about it, then we are not going to be able to make good decisions. So it's super important for each of us to do that. Now, when we were on the stage having our panel, part of the whole point of it was to be speaking to the people in the audience and going, even these people, right. The people who are bestsellers, the people who have won awards, the people that you came on this cruise to see and freak out a little bit about, mm-hmm. we still have problems. The thing that I tell people is, your career and your passage in life is basically a nonstop process of exchanging one set of problems for the other, right? And on one sort of sense, if Patrick Rothfuss and I are griping to each other about the problems that we're having with our TV deals, on one sort of sense, you can go, all right, super small violin because you have TV deals, right? Right. But on the other hand, for the both of us, this is about our livelihood. This is about somebody taking our stuff and transforming it into something else, and we are emotionally invested in it. And we have, and it is something where it's good to talk to someone else who has the same understanding as you do, or the same problems as you do, and figure out between the two of you if this makes sense or what's going on. So, and every step of the way, you will have a new set of problems, and it will be real problems. And so and I think it's important for other people who are not where those people are in terms of, success, to recognize that, even the most, the most accomplished of writers still have doubts and uncertainties and have issues and aggravations. And that their lives are not just a nonstop parade of accolades and happiness, mm-hmm. That the job is still a job. So it's good for the writers, and it's good for the people who want to be writers, and it's good for everybody else who doesn't know anything about our profession.
Yeah. How do you move beyond that doubt? How do you push past the self-doubt that you feel?
I don't think you necessarily have to move beyond it. I mean, sometimes self-doubt tells you, it's like, sometimes when you're writing something, you're like, I don't think this is good. You know why you think that? Because sometimes you're right. Yeah. Self-doubt is not necessarily something to get over. It is something to manage so that you don't let it swamp you. But there's a reason why one of the worst things you can say about a successful author is that they've gotten too big to edit, right?
Right.
That they have basically bought into their own press releases, and there's nobody there to tell them no. A little bit of self-doubt, a little bit of self-criticism, a little bit of, understanding that, in fact, you are not God's gift to the printed page, can go a long way to making sure that what you have is worth reading, not merely worth publishing so somebody will buy it.
Yeah. I know we've run up against our time with you, and we could easily sit here for another hour and talk to you, but I really appreciate your time. So, John, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So I'm hoping that maybe someone will sign us to a 13-year, or whatever, 13 season.
13 books, 10 years.
Deal for the Great Big Beautiful Podcast.
Sign us up for a 13 season.
Yeah, they're going to sign us for a 13 season run.
No, I don't know who would do that.
They're going to throw enough money at us that we can just go full time.
Yeah, living the dream, man. Living the dream.
Yeah, living the dream. Fantastic interview. Sherry did a great job.
Yes, I will pass that along. I'm sure she's listening now, but thank you.
I'm sure she is. So she's probably sharing it. So, do we have anything coming up, Jamie? That we haven't really talked about, or any guests coming up that we haven't aired?
We've got a lot of guests coming up that we haven't aired or really talked about. I don't know how much we want to spoil, but we've got some really good ones. And depending on whatever it is you like, or where your fandoms lie, I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. We've got somebody who's steeped in the world of Star Wars. We've got a young adult author. We've got an adult author who has a new book out and is pretty much the I don't know if he defined internet celebrity, but like he sort of made a huge name for himself online. You'll know who it is when you see it. We've got comic book writers. We've got makers. Yeah, man, we got a comedian. We've got another podcaster. I mean, we've got a lot coming up, and we're really covering the range. So it'll be good. Whatever you like, we've probably got something for you.
And we have the podcaster we have is someone who started his show when we started ours, but he has an audience of millions. So
it's a little bit humbling. We'll probably mention this again on that show. We started the same week, and he's been in the top 10 podcasts of iTunes. So it's like we're in different leagues, even though we're exactly the same age. Close. But it was great. It's great to talk. We're close. We still have our dreams and aspirations.
Maybe if they release a top 3,000 list, we'll be there. I'm just self-deprecation.
There you go.
Self-deprecation. All right, guys. If you want to find us online, we're at the GBB Podcast on Facebook and Twitter, and I am Justin at 140 Justin C.
I am Jamie at the Roarbots.
We'll see you next week right here on the Great Big Beautiful Podcast. See you later.
Take care.
This podcast has been a production of the Geek Dad Podcast Network. If you've enjoyed this content, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/geekdad.